Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another reading of the English Journey by J.B. Priestley. Very close to the end now. We must be very close to the end, and we'll see how far we get today. It's been an interesting book. I didn't quite know what to expect, really, when I started reading it, and I'm still not sure what I make of it. But it's certainly an insight into Britain in the 1930s, early 1930, 1933 to be precise, as we know. Hello, Fiona Hammond. Hello to Audrey and to Ramiboo, to Philip and to Michael and to Judith. Good morning. Nice to see you this morning. We're going to carry on with our reading. Hope you're all well, by the way. I was told, somebody emailed me or put a message on YouTube, I can't remember where now, about China clay and how it's in paper. Comes from Cornwall, apparently, and it's what makes photographs stand out well on print. It's in the paper they use. So there it is. However, the glare I'm getting from the light is a nuisance. Good morning, Mike Brack. Good morning to you. Good morning to Sarah as well. Thank you for joining me yet again for another read. So we left him in Norfolk, and there's a picture here of Tombland Alley in Norfolk. If I can get the camera to operate this morning. Nice timber frame building here. Look at that. Probably still there, I imagine. That's 80 years ago. 90 years ago. 90 years ago. Right, I wasn't actually on that page. Jaden, nice to see you there. I hope everyone's well. Thank you, Jaden. Michael, you asked a suggestion. Oh, here we go. For a new book, Richard. 66 and Rather More is a great book. I thought you were going to say 1066 and All That. Is a great book by, I can't pronounce that name, Huang Malayu. The book covers his walk from Stamford Bridge to Hastings. Oh, okay. The book covers his walk, what Hangu Malalu or Harold, King Harold's 1066. Graham Roffey, good morning, everyone. Johnny Parsons, good morning to you. Very kind of you to pop in as we're going to do our English reading this morning. Thank you very much. Right, so we left him, God knows, I can't remember exactly where he was and what he was doing, but he was in Norfolk. Let me have another slurp of my coffee. Try and wait. I'm a bit tired this morning, so I hope I don't nod off. I did sleep well, though. I slept well. Maybe it's because I slept well that I feel still a little bit... I was up at 6, so I should be awake. I dined that night with a friend, a Norwich man of some fame, and one very knowledgeable about the city and the surrounding district. He lives cosily and conveniently on the outskirts, with a tram terminus at his left hand and a neat little potato crop of his own growing at his right. I always find myself happy and at home, alas, though always far from home, in the cities where I am once asked, confidently and proudly, what I think of the place. They do it in Bristol and they do it in San Francisco, and of course Norwich is one of these cities. As soon as I've been given my glass of sherry, I had to tell them what I thought of Norwich. I answered truthfully that I knew very little about it, but that I'd always liked it, and from what I'd seen of it. But like Bristol, it is no mere provincial town. It is not simply an old cathedral city, it is something more. An antique metropolis, the capital of East Anglia. In a very large slice of England, to thousands and thousands of sensible folk who live and work there, Norwich is the big city, the centre, and has been for hundreds of years. Excuse me. My own native town is more than twice the size of Norwich, but somehow it doesn't seem half the size. This is not merely because Norwich has a cathedral and castle and the rest, but also because it has flourished as the big city in the minds of men for generations. It is no mere jumped-up conglomeration of factories, warehouses and dormitories. It may be minute compared with London, Paris and Rome, but nevertheless it lives its life as a city on the same level of dignity. It's not a place in which to make money quickly and then to plan a sudden exit. It's not filled with people who are there because they have never been offered a job elsewhere. No, Norwich is really a capital, the capital of East Anglia. I wish it were bigger and more important than it is. Perhaps it ought to be turned into the real capital of East Anglia. Many great people are coming to believe that government in this country is now far too centralised. Too much work has to be done in Westminster. There is too wide a gap between the local councils and Parliament. These people suggest that England should be divided into 4, 5 or 6 provinces, and that these provinces should to some extent govern themselves. Their representations would be to settle among themselves the merits of a large number of questions. Business in the House of Commons would not be so congested and unwieldy, and Parliament would be able to give its undivided attention to broadly national affairs. Moreover, regional self-government of this kind would do something to revive the spirit of democracy. Under a democratic system, politics should be local, so that you can keep an eye on them. Indeed, in a large modern state, you need a very elaborate and constructed pyramid of representational government with parochial councils for the base and a national assembly at the apex, in order that the democratic system can work properly. It cannot work properly if legislator, it's a difficult word, isn't it, is something that is happening under a cloud of mysterious etiquette in a distant capital. It is a system that assumes that nearly everybody is taking an interest in the government. The more difficult it is for anybody to concern themselves in political matters, the worse it is for democracy. Centralisation is one of the deadliest enemies of the system. For this reason alone, there is much to be said in favour of regional government in England. But I also suggest that such government would bring a new dignity to provincial life, just as it would increase the importance of the various new provincial capital cities where the deputies or the senators would meet. And on any such occasion, on any such division of the country into provinces, Norwich would be a capital of its own, as it has been for nearly all practical purposes the last 300 years. That, however, is what I meant by wishing, above, that there are bigger and more important than this. I would like to see it nobly housing East Anglian senators who would be as sagacious and weighty a body of legislators as you could wish to find. I heard that the local constabulary are rarely less than 10 to a ton, and I believe that the senators would be equally massive in mind as a body. Well, there you go. I don't know what that was. All that bleating was about, really. Centralised governments and stuff. The East Anglican is, of course, a solid man. Lots of beef and beer, tempered with the east wind, have gone into making him. Once he is sure that you are not going to cheat him or be very grand and affected, he is a friendly chap. But if you want the other thing, you can have it. The Ironsides were recruited from these parts, which have produced a great many fighting men of all kinds, from pugilists to admirals. Perhaps we of the West Riding brought some of our aggressive qualities from Norfolk. My host reminded me of the connection between the two districts. The Worcester Trade of Bradford originally came from Norfolk, where Worstead is a village. Up to the Industrial Revolution, Norwich had a fine trade in worsteds, but also but lost it to the West Riding, which had the coal and better communications. I didn't know that. Didn't know that Norwich had. There's a village in there called Worcester, which is presumably where the worsted wool comes from. It's interesting. And when its textile trade dwindled, Norwich turned to the manufacturing of fancy boots and shoes, chiefly women's, and has continued in that trade to this day. But many of her textile workers migrated to the West Riding, and my host told me that he remembered the old bank cashier saying that in his youth more money orders came to Norwich from Bradford than from any other place. But Norwich was concerned in much more important migration than these. It was here that so many of the Flemish and Huguenot weavers came, solid and sober families of workers escaping from persecution even. It was intolerance that made us a present of them and robbed France of their solid services. The Dutch came here in considerable numbers too, and my friend remembered hearing a sermon in Dutch in the city. Norwich is also a city of Quaker bankers, who were very prominent in the life of the place during the latter half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th, during which period the city was a literary and publishing centre and had its own famous school of landscape painters. It was the fact that the Quaker was a man of his word that made him so acceptable as a banker or trader in the 18th century, when the junketing squires had to look somewhere for money. You have then a very rich mixture in the city, equally famous for its old churches and its sturdy dissenters. And like all cities with mixed trades, here are the shoes, mustard and starch, ironware, beer. It's escaped the full weight of the industrial depression. Its citizens are proud of the old place, and they have a right to be, and I, for one, wish there were more of it. Home rule for East Anglia. We had some talk at dinner about the villages and local farmers, and the next morning, which was fine and not too cold, we went out to explore the countryside in a small car. It doesn't take you long to lose Norwich. A few U-turns down some side roads, once you're past the main tram terminus, and you're soon in the true country. We stopped at a village grocer's and a general store, known to my friend, and found the proprietor and his son busy setting out their stock, which was beginning to wear a Christmassy look. The little shop was very clean and bright, quite different from the nasty shops that asked to be swept out of existence in all the larger towns. They were a busy, canny pair, cautious in their statements and given to rubbing their long chins. Yes. They had known better times, they admitted, but couldn't grumble. The small farmers in these parts, and they are nearly all small farmers, had, I knew, been having a bad time. And my friend, who is a trustee administering an estate and has to do business with a lot of them, confirmed this. But he also showed the unusual scepticism of those who have to deal with the farming community but do not belong to it. The East Anglian farmer, he declared, is a very stubbornly conservative fellow, who will often insist upon raising a certain crop simply because his father and grandfather before him always raised that crop, without reference to the needs and the conditions of the time. This is the way to be a character, but not the way to make money. He was doubtful, however, about their losses. We called on one acquaintance of his, a middle-aged man farming about 100 acres, and not, according to the report, making them pay. He was a shabby and muddy little man, with carroty curls and stubble, bright blue eyes. He didn't look very intelligent, and for all I know to the contrary, he may have been very unintelligent farmer. But truth compels me to say that he talked about his farm and his work quite intelligently, and listening to him, you felt with so much sense and energy he deserved to make a decent living for himself out of this 100 acres. We wandered about, looking at his beasts, which were all in good condition, and at his fields, which were scattered about, not very convenient for him. He told us, among other things, that he had listened regularly to the agricultural talks on the wireless. He belonged to old farming stock, and a very bewildered look crept into his honest face when he spoke of the difficulty making his farm pay. It must be difficult for a farmer, and one of the generations of farmers, to understand that this slow traffic with the land and the familiar beasts is a business like manufacturing and selling pins or boots, and the strange antics of men in offices 1,000 miles away, and the weather on the other side of the world, and I've read this very strangely. Let me just go back, sorry. It must be difficult for a farmer, and one of generations of farmers, to understand that his slow traffic with the land and familiar beasts is a business, like manufacturing and selling pins or boots, and that strange antics of men in offices thousands of miles away, and the weather on the other side of the world, and the rumours of wars, the negotiations of diplomats, the suspicions and panics of fantastic foreigners, the mysterious ebb and flow of credit, can all combine quietly to take his living away from him and finally steal the very acres from under his nose. What is so difficult for the urban outsider to understand, on his part, is how farmers work out their budgets. Clearly, their position is quite different from that of the townsman or the ordinary wage earner anywhere. To begin with, the farm itself is where he and his family live, so that its rent or purchase price includes that of his dwelling house. Then again, unlike the ironmonger or the bookseller, he can often make his breakfast and dinner off what he is selling. A farm that contains within itself cattle, sheep, pigs, poultry, potatoes, and vegetables is nothing less than a vast large. Can we do it in a different language? It would be so much easier. It's nothing less than a large. There's no large in there. There's nothing less than a vast larder, out of which the farmer and his family are taking liberal supplies. That's not a very a nice way of saying it. Does he credit himself with the value of these supplies in his budget? The point is, he may not make much, but he doesn't need to spend much. Nobody insists upon a farmer dressing neatly in a black coat, striped trousers, shiny boots, and spats. He has not to travel every day. He is not compelled to provide his children with expensive holidays to give them some fresh air. He has not to do any window dressing of any kind to attract custom or to keep up appearances. He has, I imagine, nothing like the social and charitable demands on his pocket than the urban employer has. If he is regularly attending to his work, then he need not spend a penny getting exercise, as most sedentary workers have to do. He can be in a bad way of business, but it will be a long time before he and his family go hungry. Ultimately, if things go from bad to worse, he can survive like other men. But does he starve? I ask out of ignorance. I have met starving engineers and schoolmasters and casual labourers and clerks and miners and sailors, but I have yet to meet a starving farmer. Is this still my ignorance? We discussed these and similar topics all the way back from the farm to the outskirts of Norwich, where we stopped to have a look at Earlham, the charming old house that appears in Mr. Lubbock's volume of that name, once the home of a fine old banking family, and now the proud possession of the city itself. This is an admirable example of the public spirit of Norwich citizens. An even better example is found in the city's purchase of land all around the edge of town, which is now enclosed in a green ring about 2 miles wide. This is what every city should do. It ought to have been done in London years ago. Not only is the open space valuable in itself, but it also sets a boundary to the city. It is time we discourage this sprawling practice of our cities, which, instead of spoiling more and more of the surrounding countryside, would be compelled to rebuild their worst districts and make the best of the area they already occupy. They have played the octopus long enough. Quite like that. They played the octopus long enough. Good morning to everybody who has joined me. David Kitchen, good morning to you. Jada Jones, good morning. Philip Hammond said good morning already. John Blake, good day from sunny Queensland. No new cases of COVID. State government might relax some of the rules. Fantastic. That sounds absolutely brilliant. J.W. Harville, good morning. Jaden Kowalski. Less population equals more nature and country. Absolutely. To explore. Yes. Rita Loy, good morning, Richard and fellow viewers. Good morning to you. Stephen Ruff, large island. It's a blooming great continent. I like the lad's car, says Jaden. I like the lad's car. Not quite sure what you refer to there, but hey-ho. Coming away from Eartham, we began to talk about the literary figures of Norwich, chief of whom are Sir Thomas Browne and Burrough. The house once occupied by the delectable Sir Thomas has been marked by a tablet, to the confusion of a certain well-known directory, which in its 1929 edition included Sir Thomas Browne among the medical practitioners of Norwich. There is a good short story to be written about some innocent who sent for him, not in vain. On the edge of the city we met an old nursery gardener, well known to my companion. He was the true old-fashioned dissenting type, cropped whiskers, shaven chin, and a mouth that turned down at each end, black suit and a dicky, a wooden look that suddenly twinkled, a passion for imparting knowledge. I knew plenty of them when I was a boy, stiff, creaking figures they seemed to these ancient days, more like mechanisms to my young mind than flesh and blood men. But I doubt if any of them are still living. You would, I imagine, find more of them alive and kicking here in Norwich than anywhere else. Our man was certainly alive, and he might have been said to have been kicking one of his assistants who had forgotten to carry out some order or other. And just you go down to Boots chemist, he's writing in the vernacular. And just you go down to Boots chemist, the old man concluded, and ask them to put you up one of their little bottles of memory mixture, and that's what you go and do. Then he turned to us with a face made of wool, with a twinkle in his deep set eyes. I knew that either he would utter the least probable number of words, or, if we found favour in his sight, he would immediately impart some information to us and instruct us. We found favour. He began to tell us how to grow roses, and as he, like a superb conjurer, knows the trick of bringing the most extravagantly lovely roses out of the sullen ground, we listened to him with respect. He then told us what sort of winter it would be, and from what quarter the prevailing wind would blow. He spoke with far more certainty than the younger men who report on air pressures in Iceland and off the Azores. He explained because he had examined the holes made by tiny shrew mice, which have the information about the coming winter denied to us, and always make their holes away from the direction of what will be the prevailing wind, and dig deep if a hard winter is before them. You cannot, he told us emphatically, just as if we were two small boys he had caught trying to build a planet or two, improve on Mother Nature. And as he spoke of nature, as such people always do, as if he had been a member of a small community that had, as if he'd been a member of the small committee that had first appointed her, he put me back 30 years into Sunday school. I was delighted to have met him, a good, if narrow man, and a character. And how odd that roses, those lovely wantons, should bloom so profusely for him, that he should know far, far more about them than ever the smiling, drunken Omar did, whoever the smiling, drunken Omar is. After lunch, and the dining room of the Maid's Head is a perfect place in which to eat boiled beef, carrots and dumplings, I joined the crowd that was shopping in Queen Street and London Street. It was a fine afternoon. The shops were already stocked for Christmas, which seems to be inalienably associated now in the commercial mind with dabs of cotton wool. There were a great many people, both men and women, staring and chattering and popping in and buying, and the city looked very different from what it had done the day before. It had, in fact, a solid, prosperous appearance, and was at once gay and weighty, not unlike one of those cheeses decorated with coloured paper that were now appearing in the grocers' windows. I went into several of the antique furniture shops. Norwich is filled with them, rather in the hope of picking up a good early watercolour drawing than finding a piece of furniture. But I was unlucky this time, and there was nothing remarkable on view. In one strange old shop I found a long, thin man who specialised in making reproduction old pieces, which reproductions are honestly sold for what they are, though what happens to them afterwards may be a different story. Some of them had taken a good craftsman a year or 18 months to make, and the workmanship was often better in the reproduction than in the original piece. The value, of course, was nothing like the same. It seems queer that we should take such pains to copy exactly what our forefathers made. They didn't copy what their forefathers made, but preferred their own contemporary styles, which matched the age. We have our own styles, of course. I'm writing this on a desk that was made this year to my order, a desk that is just as 20th century in its style as a Chippington or a Sheraton is 18th century, and moreover is 20th century, or if you like, 1933-ish, without looking like a fitting in a cocktail bar. And in this same room are 2 chairs, a desk and an armchair that are as contemporary in design as a Rolls-Royce. At last we're beginning to achieve our own characteristic furniture, good solid furniture too, and not merely stunt pieces made of metal tubing. Don't worry, they're coming in the 60s. Stunt pieces. I love that. Made of metal tubing. Yeah, they're all... I'm sitting on one. I'm sitting on a chair that's sort of a stunt piece made of metal tubing. But so far, these things are a tremendous extravagance, and to acquire 1 or 2 specimens, you have to be determinedly self-indulgent. What happened in the reign of Queen Anne and George III? Had you to be extravagant then to acquire those pieces of furniture that we now covet? Or did you merely go out and buy a few chairs, a table and a bureau, and find that without being self-indulgent you had acquired some beautiful pieces? The question is not one of the larger problems of our time, but neither is it entirely trivial. I think it is rather trivial. Quite interesting, however. Omar is clearly Omar Khayyam. I cannot recall the verses he refers to. Omar Khayyam? I've never heard of him. He's a poet, presumably, is he? Where was that reference? Oh, what Omar did. How odd that roses, lovely wantons, should bloom so profusely for him, or that he should know far more about them ever than smiling, drunken Omar did. Omar Khayyam, okay. Correct active text is a nightmare, especially if you have a black friend called Nigel. Right. Yes, that's true. Dodgy. Back in the hotel, after tea, I met a freelance journalist with whom I had several friends in common. We had the big fireplace in the smoking room to ourselves, and over a drink we talked about our trade of writing. He had spent some years as a journalist in America and put forward the view that our law of libel, which is very much stricter than the American one, gagged the enterprising journalist and favoured corruption in public affairs. He declared that I think this is still true, isn't it? He declared that you dare not tell the truth about municipal matters in any of the English provincial papers, whereas in America, if you nosed out some corrupt job, and there were always plenty to nose out, you could put your discoveries into print. Hence the Watergate, of course. Many people will say at once, in reply to this, that public life is not so corrupt here as it is in America. Pfft, yeah, right. And neither is it. But on the other hand, especially in municipal affairs, it is a great deal more corrupt than most people would imagine. Yes, I bet it is. During my travels this autumn, I have heard a good many stories in proof of this. But until the people concerned are actually in the dock, nothing gets into print. Our hush-hush atmosphere is perfect for a cool rascal who is pocketing public money. So long as he looks respectable and doesn't get drunk in broad daylight, lives with his own wife, he's probably safe. There is something to be said for this journalist's argument. We do not want here the gutter raking that frequently passes in America as the protestations of a reforming spirit. But on the other hand, we need a great deal more freedom than we do at present. Editors and publishers in this country are terrified, rightly terrified, of the crushing law of libel, which works so badly now that it is actually creating a new branch of blackmail. And it is an ironical circumstance that there are several books on American public affairs, books containing attacks on various American public figures, that are openly sold and read and commented on over there, but have not been published at all in England, because if the books did appear here, and the persons attacked in them would instantly take advantage of our law of libel. This is not a very serious deprivation. It is much more serious that our press, especially our provincial press, should be gagged. What with the necessity of pleasing advertisers and the further necessity of escaping libel actions, our editors hardly dare open their mouths. I should like to be in some of our provincial cities for a day or two if some American methods in journalism were applied, and the truth about Councillor What's-his-name and Alderman such-and-such was splashed in the headlines. It's easy to imagine a quick descent into muck-slinging if all restrictions were removed. But surely there is a sensible halfway position between being gagged and gutter-raking that the law could allow us to occupy. Please note the ignominy of the last phrase, could allow us to occupy. If the laws were not created for our benefit, but were the arbitrary dictates of some capricious... As if the laws are not created for our benefit, but were the arbitrary dictates of some capricious monster. How well drilled we are, and yet we give ourselves away with these casual phrases. Oh, we're nearly at the end of the chapter. We'll just get to the end of the chapter. Omar, oh, here we go. Is J.B. Priest telling us of his travels through English countryside? Oh, sorry. Yes. Is it fact or fiction? It's faction. I think it's faction because I was reading in this other book about J.B. Priestley, and at the time there became this in the 1930s, in the 30s, there became this a period of where they said people wanted facts but disguised as fiction. It became more palatable if it was rather than just solid facts. So and then people were doing certain sort of truthful things, and as J.B. Priestley says at the beginning of this is what I saw, thought, and heard on my journey. And he's writing it after the journey, and he did the journey and made notes, and then he's writing this up as he describes at this tremendously extravagant, self-indulgent desk that he's bought with the 2 armchairs and what have you, which is very 20th century in his study. But there was things like The Road to Wigan Pier by, what's his name, who did Down and Out in London. Oh, come on. The 1984 author, whose name? What's... Oh, God, I was only reading about it this morning. George Orwell. Thank you, brain. George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier. And before that, there was a number of other ones. What's his name? H.V. Morton. I think it's H.V. H.M. Morton, H.V. Morton, or M.V. Morton, who wrote In Search of England, and numerous other publications sort of in search of England that came out there because of the motorist and the motor car and the invention of the motor car and people travelling and moving about and trying to sort of give this slightly romantic and perhaps can't think of the word, cliche version of rural England and things. But Priestley wanted to do something different that wasn't the romantic, here is rural England to be discovered if you go in your car and journey about. You can go through the Yorkshire Dales and see the lovely sheep and the dry stone walls and all of this. He clearly has gone into the industrial wastelands and looked at the depression, and looked where is prosperous and where isn't prosperous. I would love to listen to you read Bill Bryson's Notes from a Small Island, a similar type of journey describing someone who loves England more than his homeland, and funny. Yeah, I have read Notes from a Small Island, and it is sorry about the noise. It sounds like I'm farting, but it's just this chair every time I move in it. There it goes again. And it is funny, and all this business where I remember him catching buses. It was, and what I love, and this is why I recommended a book the other day called London Belongs to Me by Norman Collins. I love the normality, the sort of boring normality of life in fiction. This book, London Belongs to Me, which is I think is a terrific book, because very little really happens. Some events happen, but not much happens. But it's more about this snapshot of life in the 40s that was written, or the late 30s, and because the 40s obviously you had the war going on. I think it was in just before the war, and it's just the sort of it's the buying of bus tickets and sitting on the back, and the real very boring everydayness of life, and I think that comes over very well. And maybe that's in the same bracket that people were quite interested in facts but disguised as fiction. So in that, although there's fictitious things going on, it's all this sort of sitting down in the front parlour and having cups of tea, and the whole social side of the proper way that you did not preaching in any way. It just unfolds that the kettle was on and out comes the crockery, and this crockery was reused over that crockery, and the conversation, and you think, what is actually happening here? Is anything really happening? But it's so, and I think it's more interesting now than probably at the time. I don't know. John Blake says, in Queensland, the state government can investigate local councils, and if they are found to be taking liberties, they can sack them and hold a new election. Good thing. I watched London Belongs to Me yesterday, says Audrey Forbes Hamilton. What did you make of the film? The film was very close to the book, but clearly a very condensed version of the book. And Graham Greene books are also very good. Yes, no, absolutely. I have read a few of Graham Greene's. My local mob got the boot 2 years ago, and we just had an election. Well, I guess that keeps them on their toes, doesn't it? And hopefully keeps them on the straight and narrow. I assume that fingers in the till and all of that is not tolerated. I wish we had more of that going on here. Would camping in the countryside for a long time in a tent, but not a house, count as living there? Well, you're living, aren't you, I suppose? Morning, Julia. How are you? What else have we got here? Is J.B. Priestley telling travels through the... Oh, yes, I read that. Oh, sorry, it is, yeah. Corrective texting. Oh, yeah. Is this fact or fiction? That's right. Yeah, I'd love to know what, Audrey, you thought of London Belongs to Me. It's a curious. The book is better than the film by any means. Right, so let's just get to the end of this chapter because there's only a little bit left. My Norwich friend dined with me that night at the hotel, where our small table was anchored not far from the enormous one set out for a fine dinner party. Indeed, it seemed that some local professional man was giving a party there, and just as we were finishing, they came in, splendid in full evening dress and all very jolly. There's no reason why I should mention this, except that to me, obscurely, I admit, that solid, civilised and jovial dinner party at the old inn was somehow typical of the city. We left them in their dining room and went to see The School for Scandal at the Madder Market Theatre. Ah, School for Scandal. Is that the one with Ian Carmichael and Terry Thomas? School for Scandal. Oh no, that's School for Scoundrels. That must be the rip-off. School for Scoundrels. Oh, the School for Scandal. I don't know that one then. Yes, the School for Scoundrels. It's a great film. Based on Stephen Potter's books of one-upmanship. Anybody know those? The one-upmanship? My dad introduced me to those. Plaid's Placid Salute. The whole basis... I've forgotten about that. The whole basis of... in the old days of motoring, when I mean it happens now, but instead we get the one-fingered salute. But the one-upmanship was this whole process or principle rather of implying that you're better than the person next to you without actually having to be better. But it's all about the implication. So this thing called Plaid's Placid Salute. Is this, and I think people do it now all the time, but don't know where it's sort of what the origin is. That Stephen Potter had developed in his books, one-upmanship and life-upmanship, sports-upmanship. I think there were 3 books. School for Scoundrel is a Regency play. Oh right, okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so that if you're in a car and you inadvertently somebody's coming out and you cut them up, what you do is you wave at them, but not in a I'm sorry, but in a more I will let you off, so that you're the one doing the cutting off and someone's coming out and you're in the wrong. But what you do in Stephen Potter's thing is you put your hand up as if to say, it's all right, don't worry, I'll let you off, even though you're the one in the wrong, which then of course makes you one up because they think, oh, was I in the wrong? It's something along that. He describes it so much better than I. Plaid's Placid Salute. It's funny how these things come flooding back, isn't it? Oh dear. Yes, so The School for not School for Scoundrels, with Terry Thomas and Ian Carmichael. It's a terrific film. I absolutely love both those actors. And Terry Thomas, for obvious reasons, I say it's an absolute shower. But Ian Carmichael was a terrific actor. Anyway, the whole point. We left the dining room, went to see The School for Scoundrel at the Madder Market Theatre. I'd heard a lot about this little amateur repertory theatre with its apron stage and Elizabethan interior. It has done some very good work, especially with miracle plays and the Elizabethan drama. And I knew it was entirely the creation of one enthusiast, Mr. Nugent Monk, who made this very charming little theatre out of an old warehouse. It is a lovely toy, not too comfortable and rather too dimly lit for my taste, but nevertheless a delicious place. A familiar old comedy was not brilliantly acted, for the company is an amateur one, and 18th century comedy needs great polish, but it was pretty to look at, and by the ingenious use of curtains as scenes, it moved at great pace, so that one sat there in that dim little theatre staring at a flickering dream of brocaded wits and beaux. It now, and how delightful to turn in from a dusky old St. Andrew Street and St. John's Alley to find oneself at Lady Sneerwell's. How delightful, when the piece was done and Mr. Monk had been congratulated, to wander out again into the ancient streets, where at every corner that held a bit of lamplight you saw a perfect stage set, one after another, with century after century caught and held in a gable, in a bit of heavily shadowing timber, a fat bulging bay window, a fanlight, all Georgian elegance, in tiny spades of yellow light, with a frosty glitter of stars above the sleeping city. Delightful, too, to have a last drink, sprawling in front of the fire at the Maid's Head, and to hear the honest roars of a Norfolk man as he describes to you his bemused adventures in certain artistic quarters of that remote and fantastic fellow capital city, London. It is this same friend of mine, if this same friend of mine had been a Manchester or a Newcastle or a Birmingham or a Leeds man, he would have done what 100 of us have done and removed to London. But he is not. He's a Norwich man, and there he stays, coming to London as a London man might go to Berlin or Rome, and not hesitating to let out a good East Anglian bellow of laughter when he remembers Bloomsbury and Chelsea and the doings there. One of the last things he told me was that he might be compelled, being a dutiful fellow, to stand for the city council. For my part, I hope to see him mayor before I die, and promise now to go and see him in the part, peep at him in whatever glorious old mullioned, timbered or bulging bay window parlour the city gives its chief citizen. What a grand, higgledy-piggledy, sensible old place Norwich is. May it become once more a literary and publishing centre, the seat of a fine school of painters, a city in which foreigners exiled by intolerance may seek refuge and turn their sons into sturdy and cheerful East Anglicans. And may I live to see the senators of the Eastern province, stout men who take mustard and with their beef, and beer with their mustard, march through Tombland to assemble in their capital. We are on the last chapter now, ladies and gentlemen, to the end, which is, well, we might be able to do this, well, maybe in 2 days, maybe in two sessions, who knows. We may, if we're very lucky. It's a few pages. Where are we on? Page 319 to 336. Yeah, that might be two sessions then, to the end. How exciting to have read pretty much now the whole book over the internet in this session, with many of you coming back to listen. That to me it's very lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, so that was Norfolk. And Clearly he liked the higgledy-piggledy fat bay windows. How marvellous. So Audrey says of London Belongs to Me, very of its time, it wasn't really explained how he was pardoned or why the neighbours used their life savings to pay for his defence. I was sorry they didn't get their cottage in the country. Yes, it's funny because in the book, it's not a major thing. The film has slanted towards the defence and stuff, and in the book that's not really the major thing. The fun that the author has with the different characters and it's such a better book. I lived in Lisboa and Porto as well. I go to Portugal with my street theatre in the summer months and love it. Fantastic. What do you do in your street theatre? Be interested to know what you do there. Richard, was the theatre director's name Nugent Monk? What a classic. Yes, that was the theatre. That was his name. What is the name of that book? Well, the book I'm reading now is called English Journey by J.B. Priestley. English Journey. What comes next, Richard? And can we have a bit of Samuel Pepys? Something a bit naughty. Yeah, Samuel Pepys is a bit naughty. Been trying to work out what to do next. Obviously, whatever it is has to be out of print, really, because I'll get done. But if it's in print, or rather out of copyright, I'll get done by the, so it has to be 70 years old, I think it is, or something, or just so obscure that nobody's ever going to know, sort of thing. The Adventures of Tom Jones. I don't know that one actually. I have never seen a film that is better than a book. Yeah, I guess if somebody's written a film first and then they write the book, often that can be a disaster because they're padding out what was never really there, I suppose. How about Robin Page's book? You were going to read that. It's like, for example, Robin Page's book, I couldn't read that one because it's in copyright and it was too, they're still selling it. It's still in print and it's still in first edition sort of form. That would be bad of me to do that and probably get charged with it. I don't know. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was originally a radio series and then it came into a book or a series of books. And the books are okay. But the radio series, because it was originally written as that, I think the book, to me, was then just pretty much the radio series with a little bit of description in there. What's the name of the book? Great Richard. Glad you could join us, Julia. Missed you. Hope all is well. See you tonight. I think you would do Pepys of Dickens' Adventures of Tom Jones well with your accent and daft voices. Yes, that's true. I was looking up here to see if I've got Pepys' diary. It's on the other shelf. It would be, yes, Mr. Pepys, come in and sit yourself down. It'd be fun to do a whole series of little characters. Pepys came in and sat on a chair and looked. Well, it's all written from his point of view. Yes. It's got to be. It's unfortunately it would have to be a bit out of date, and yeah, I'll have to think because we've only got 2 days. I think we'll get this one done in 2 days. Where are we today? Monday. So Wednesday. So Thursday could be a new book. The copyright law is that it must be 70 years. That's what after the author's death, not the date of publication. So JB's book is still in copyright. Oh, well, there you go. Thanks, Diana. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you. That was I'm in quite bliss. We can't do the last chapter because it's still in print. It's still in copyright. Damn it. He died in 1960. So, yeah, we've got a few years to wait. The name of the book you're currently reading is is called English Journey by J.B. Priestley, and it is on the description of this YouTube video. So it should be there in underneath on the title and in the description. What about something by Hardy? Thomas Hardy. Oh my goodness, yes. He is difficult to read aloud. I've tried. He is difficult to read aloud. I think, though, if nothing else, me reading this in the way that I'm reading it, not as a professional, well-read, edited piece of stuff that is out of print. If anything, it's probably sold a few copies. Well, I bought 2 copies myself. Orwell's Road to Wigan Pier. Defoe's Tour of the Whole of the Great Island of Britain. Oh, yes, I have got that. I've got that. Daniel Defoe's The Tour of England and... Yes, I forget the proper title. I have got that. That's interesting. Rural Rides by... What's his name? Rural Rides. That would be... That would take you for bloody ever, that one. Cobbett. William Cobbett. That would be... that could be a good one. There's all these sort of things that I would love to follow in their footsteps. If only I could raise the money to have a film crew, and it might just be 1 or 2 people. 2 people, really, and me, 3 of us, to go, and you book that so you could follow in these different people. Rural Rides would be good. He did a lot. Cider with Rosie is very lovely. Yeah, William Cobbett. Thank you, Morton. Cider with Rosie, Laurie Lee. But his other one. What's his other book called? Where he goes to Spain. So beautifully written. That is so... Cider with Rosie, I've only got halfway through that. But the other one... what's his other one called? I want to make a documentary and a book about Tevill Gate. Oh my God. Really? Tevill Gate. I would love them to put it back to how it originally was, with the pond and the windmill down the other side and the little toll house and all of that. Would be lovely, even if it was apocryphal or whatever. What was I just saying? Who wrote As I Stepped Out One Midsummer's Morning? Yes, that's it, isn't it? Laurie Lee. Beautiful. He walks from... Where is he? He's in Swindon or somewhere. He's in one of these sort of nondescript towns now. No disrespect to anybody living in Swindon. And he walks down, he goes through, I think, near Wembley or something. And I just remember this one particular phrase he has about looking at suburban people. And he says, and I mentioned this the other day because it stuck in my mind so vividly, that he looked in the window and the people were behind these windows as if... forgotten the phrase now, fermenting behind their windows, which I think is so true. And in today's video, I go to Ferring in the on the Bald Explorer video, and this beautiful village. And I mention at the end, to get to Ferring from Worthing, you go past miles of bungalows, and to me it was the same sort of feel, that you look in there and people are just in these very sort of matchbox houses. They're very nice and all the rest of it, but people could quite easily be fermenting behind their windows. Yeah, it was... it looked like a slum sort of thing. Yeah, it did. You're talking about Tevill Gate. Well, at one point it was this, go far back enough, it was this just bit of open ground with a pond and everything, and a route up towards Broadwater and further north. And then the Victorians expanded like they have where I live, and they built the parade of shops, and that was all very nice and twee, and the railway was in front. nearby, and that was much prettier than anything that we've had since. But they knocked all that down in the 60s, and then they built this parade of shops, and they built the tax office, and they built the multi-storey car park, and pretty much it was a bit of an eyesore. It's probably quite smart at the time, from the 60s new way people were living, modernity and stuff, and but it soon seemed to start lacking. I don't know whether they used the wrong kind of concrete or the bricks or something. It just seemed to look very dirty very quickly and very disorderly, and then people started to leave the shops, and the concrete brutalist architecture, and then it became an eyesore for many, many years, and now they've flattened it, thank goodness, and now who knows what they're going to put in there, some equal monstrosity. Anyway, we're at past. Thank you very much for joining me. Did you read Nigel's comments on ferring? You apparently missed the really interesting site. I haven't read his comments. I haven't looked at many of the comments on there. I'm sure I probably missed. This is the problem. You go to these places, and it is all very well people saying, "Oh, Richard, do you miss this, that, and the other?" And people have got a lot of local knowledge, and I wasn't really there to go to any specific interesting site. I wanted to start at the church and just look at the lovely architecture and just give a flavour of it. So I'm sure on many occasions I do this, and people come in and they say, "Oh, Richard, you missed this," and I never claim to be an expert, and I never claim to know all of these things. I don't have time to sort of read up on it. So yeah, I'm sorry about that. Used to be modern, but died about 40 years ago. I, for some reason, am super duper fascinated by Tevill Gate. Good for you, Jaden. Anyway. Yes, so I will be back again tomorrow morning, 9:30, to finish, well, maybe the penultimate reading, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much for watching. It's been absolutely fascinating as ever, and illuminating. I must go to Norwich and have a look at that. Till next time, take care, look after yourself, have a good day, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.